wanting more than most any old thing. Well, when I get those jelly roll blues, I'd go get anything in this world for you.
Oh, baby. Thanks for tuning in. The Grateful Dead. A golden nugget, if you will, to our days and our times. Look, this program aims to help you be informed. Basic, simple. That's it. Okay, my tagline is be awesome. IanTrottier.com. That's IanTrottier. I come to you every Wednesday from the Wynwood district of Miami, Florida. It all started, folks, from the Zika scare that hit South Florida last year and the outrage that was sparked over the pesticide that was being sprayed for it. Nailed. Okay, it just so happens that Nailed was engineered in the 1950s by the Chevron Chemical Corporation. What is Nailed? It's also known as Dibrom. It's currently manufactured by Van Card Chemical Corporation out of Los Angeles. All right? If you have interest on my opinion on that, just type in Ian Trottier, Honey Colony, just as it sounds. And that article will shoot up. Miriam Hennon, she runs Honey Colony. She's been past guest on my show. We got lots and lots and lots of stuff going on, folks. And if you tuned in last hour, John Kiriakou joined us. I mean, this guy is amazing. Pardon me as I need to sneeze for a moment. 1 second. I produce and I host, and we're an independent radio show. And anyway, so John is an American legend. He's an American legend, folks. He stands up, he stood up, and he will continue to stand up for your rights, your liberties, your freedoms, and your justices. And he will do so if it costs him 2 years in federal prison, as it did. And as he basically described to us, you going to call me a rat? I'm going to call you out. You're a liar. And that's basically what he said to the U.S. government, because those above him, i.e. George Bush, were apparently of the knowledge that the Central Intelligence Agency was torturing. It may not seem like a big deal to you, but put yourself in that person's shoes. Put yourself in the person's shoes of being tortured, getting slammed up against the wall, being waterboarded, whatever it is. It's not right. It's wrong. And as he described the tactics used by the CIA, the non-torturous, build a rapport, be friendly to your enemy, was far more productive. It was just that. It was productive. In getting information to save other people's lives. The CIA, that was the FBI, the CIA took a totally different approach, and it proved to be disastrous, and John stood up for it. And he said, no, you can't do this. It's wrong. We've got a treaty with the UN. Human beings are human beings. So like I said, probably about that 501, 502 mark, John Kiriakou is a legend, folks. And not just a legend physically and emotionally and mentally. He is a legend for anybody to map or duplicate their own moral, ethical values. If something is wrong, stand up for it. Wow. Okay, so that was the 4 o'clock hour. In a few moments, we'll be joined by J.P. Linstroth. And J.P. obtained his Doctor of Philosophy, that's a Ph.D., in Social and Cultural Anthropology from the University of Oxford. And actually brought up Oxford in my discussion with John Kiriakou because Oxford just so happens to base many of their philosophical approaches to what was handed down from the Greeks. And John happens to be Greek in ancestry. So JP will join us and talk to us about his new book, which is on poetry. Let me first get into Julie's piece. Now, there's a lot happening on this program. There's lots of changes. And I want to mention that there are now, I think actually 4 contributing members to this program. The first is Julie Gomez. She's local to Miami, and she's a journalism student at a local school here, Miami-Dade College, and she will be contributing a piece each week. We also welcome to the program Melissa Lopez. And Melissa is based in Southern California. She's in Hollywood. She has radio experience and media experience. She will be contributing a weekly piece for us. And I just had an incredible discussion this afternoon with a doctor based in New York that takes a natural approach to remedy. Something that's highly important because, as in the past, we've talked extensively about vaccines. And that will be a major point of discussion come January. Vaccines. Dr. Serena will be joining us in the new year. Finally, our 4th contributor, who's jumping aboard, is Joshua Demarest. He will be editing. He's got a degree from Winthrop University. He currently works for Book Logics, based in Atlanta, Georgia. He's got an extensive young resume of media and journalism and being a contributor editor. In fact, he's editor-in-chief of the magazine Gallows Hill. So those are all new developments in the program, and we just continue to grow. Now, the piece that Julie has delivered us today has to do with a major topic from last week. And it infringes on, again, here we're talking about our rights, our liberties. Post 9/11, as we spoke about with John, we have lost major rights. And making the internet neutralized in some form is a big issue, just like the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, the economics that fund the U.S. government are centralized. That's what the Federal Reserve is, the central bank. From everything that I know, I'm not an economist, I'm not a banker, I'm not a politician at the moment, but that's what the Federal Reserve is. Okay, so when you neutralize things, it infringes on freedom and growth and justice and liberty. Julie delivers the following to us. Under President Obama, the FCC voted in favor of net neutrality in order to keep the internet open and free. On Thursday, December 14th, 2017, the FCC, led by Anjit Pai, ended net neutrality. What is net neutrality? Now, some of the terms that I previously mentioned seem to conflict, so I apologize if I was using incorrect terms, but let's continue. According to Merriam-Webster, it's the idea, principle, or requirement that internet service providers should or must treat all internet data as the same, regardless of its kind, source, or destination. To put it simply, Julie writes, internet providers can't charge websites like Netflix more than websites like Facebook or Yahoo, despite their differences in how much data or bandwidth they use, or the deals made between websites and internet providers. Net neutrality also allowed a small mom-and-pop business, website, or teenager's blog to be seen just as easily as a Fortune 500 companies. Okay, now that's important because that's kind of what we're doing here at Winwood Radio, at least on this program discussions. Any minute of the day, one can open their internet browser and find out what's going on in the world. Hear or read the same story with different perspectives, even read stories that broadcasting companies like Fox, CNN won't run. But Vice or BBC News will. However, since internet providers are now allowed to choose which websites have an easier time connecting to our phones, the numerous choices we have gain information will soon begin to decline. Stars like Jimmy Kimmel and John Oliver, along with 83% of the American population, strongly opposed the repealing net neutrality. Despite the strong opinions of many regarding it, the FCC will vote 3 to 2 on repealing it. This not only affects streaming websites, it also affects artists whom use Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Etsy, and similar sites that utilize the open internet and various opportunities it offers to make a living. Artists like Alex Cohen, the creator of Tiny Sneak Comics, and comedians like Mario Ramil depend on social media to display their creations. The internet isn't what it is because of ISPs, but as a result of millions of artists and creators who rely on people having unburdened access to what they're making. Take that away, and it's going to look a lot more like cable. The dreaded television. Segmented beyond recognition and impossible for individuals to be successful on their own. And it's not that television is not a great invention. It is. It actually invented in San Francisco. But it's the content that is allowed to infiltrate the hours of consumption on the television. Julie continues. I think any creator with an online following, regardless of their medium, has a responsibility to speak up in support of net neutrality because it's truly not a political or partisan issue. It's about the future of the internet as we know it. Cohen wrote me when asked for a statement. Again, this is Julie speaking. Though the vast majority of those dependent on the internet have begun to fear the worst, Ramil stated this, quote, big companies are always trying to bleep over their consumers one way or another. All they care about is money. Artists especially have always dealt with situations like this in one form or another. One thing is certain, whether it's online or stage or in the street, we will always express ourselves, end quote, exclamation, end quote. Citizens are choosing to express themselves by calling their state attorneys general office and insist they join the multi-state lawsuit against the FCC, starting by New York's Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, I think it is, Florida State Attorney General Pam Bondi, and Pam has not announced any plans to join the multi-state lawsuit, however. Her office number for citizenship services is 850-414-3990. Thank you, Julie. She continues. When net neutrality is typed into search engine, many articles titled Net Neutrality Rules Are Dead, Will My Bill Go Up? From USA Today, or Net Neutrality Vote, What This Means for Consumers, from many post pop-up. People are scared their way of life is going to dramatically change. Many are limited to around 2 or 3 internet providers if they're lucky. Once companies start raising their prices, those who can't afford it might have regressed back to a time without internet at their homes. The number of social media users may soon begin to dwindle if providers begin to outrageously increase their prices. Amen. Pai can still tweet photos of his giant Reese's Pieces peanut butter mug, but it'll be vain in Americans no longer afford to log into their Twitter accounts. Despite the cons this has for consumers, American citizens might agree the most troubling part of it all is the question no one has answered yet. If 83% of American population voiced their disapproval, why did the FCC still repeal net neutrality? Folks, everything leads back to money. And in money in the United States, it's called the Federal Reserve. Julia continues. And those are my comments, by the way. Citizens actively signed petitions, called the leaders of their state's government, as well directly calling the FCC. Despite the opposition met against the repealing of net neutrality, Pai, Brendan Carr, and Michael O'Reilly all voted for it. They ignored the voice of the people and chose option like companies such as AT&T and Comcast. Shout-outs, says Julie. Patreon.com/TinySneckComics. That's patreon.com/TinySneck Comics. Shout out, Facebook.com/TinySneckComics. Shout out, Facebook.com, Mario Ramil Comedy. That's MARIORAMILCOMEDY. And again, Julie is asking for all to write to Pam Bondi, FloridaLegal.com/contact. And her number, again, is 850-414-3990. If you have luck and you can get through on that number, let me know. IanTrottier.com. That's IanTrottier.com/radio if you choose. And I'll be back, folks, with JP Linstroth. Thanks for tuning in to your 5 o'clock hour of discussions. I'm your host, Ian Trottier. This is Winwood Radio. Time is 5:28. That's p.m. Eastern Standard. Again, this is WinwoodRadio.com. I'm your weekly host for the show Discussions, based out of the Winwood District of Miami, Florida. And this afternoon, we have on program for the second time Very fortunate to have J.P. Linstroth rejoining us. J.P., are you there?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the invitation again.
It's my honor. How did it go last time? We had a really cool discussion. It just so happened that the last time you came on the program, it was national news. What was going on in Spain, and so it was an interesting dynamic because for a few weeks prior to that, I'd had this marvelous talent, Pascale Valle, and she happened to be on the show that day, and so we took an interesting approach to merging the two conversations. But what's going on in your life since then? How are things?
Everything's great, Ian. Thanks a lot. Yeah, and I'm on my way to Brazil next week, and just wanted to give a quick shout out to my Brazilian girlfriend. Her name is Cassia, which is the basis of part of the book of poetry that we're going to talk about, I guess.
Cool.
And it's her birthday today, and the reason why I wanted to shout out is it's her birthday today, so I just wanted to wish her happy birthday, or feliz aniversario.
Wow.
Sorry about that. So I had to plug that in there for her.
Very cool, dude. You speak a little Portuguese, I guess, or is that the extent of it?
Yes, I'm fluent in Portuguese and Spanish, and so yeah.
All right. And where is it Kasia?
Cassia, yes.
Cassia. Where does she live?
She lives in Sao Paulo, Brazil.
In Sao Paulo. Okay. I haven't been. Have you? I'm sure you've been.
So you know that I did my Fulbright research in Brazil, in Manaus, which is in the Amazon, and so my next nonfiction book, my anthropological book, which the proposal is getting reviewed now, is based on that research. When I interviewed and researched 8 different ethnic groups within the city of Manaus, which is in the biggest city in the Brazilian Amazon.
Okay, and most of John, is it correct to say that how do you summarize what you do? Now you're obviously a doctor of philosophy. Right. You teach classes at a couple different institutions, I think. What's your main focus? What is J.P. Linstroth? How are you changing the world?
Okay. Well, right now, I'm teaching the honors program at Title I school, the Royal Palm Beach High School. I'm teaching in their ACE program, which is Cambridge University-based program, U.S. History, and their honors history, U.S. History for 11th grade. I'm an adjunct professor at Barry University. I teach an anthropology course there. I guess I'm a general intellectual. I've changed my research focus around, Ian. My doctoral research was on the Spanish Basques. We talked about that in my last book. I'm creative. I'm an artist. I'm a writer. This next book coming out is a book of poetry. I'm also probably going to write a novel here soon. And so my focus on anthropologically, at least, I had a Fulbright foreign senior scholarship to go to Brazil and study urban Indians and be a visiting visiting professor at the Universidade Federal do Amazonas there.
And you can you put on your best English accent for us? Maybe introduce your.
Sure. Hasn't come out in a while. Yeah.
So introduce your new book with an English accent.
Oh, introduce my book with an English accent. Well, the title of my new book is The Forgotten Shore. So it's a book of poetry. I've been writing poetry since I was a little kid.
Wow.
And I've been also an artist since I was a little kid. So fortunately for me, the editor chose to include some of my paintings in the book and as part of the book. So that was kind of nice.
Amazing. Okay, yeah. So the book is all right. Maybe I'll try an English accent. The Forgotten Shore Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, Forgotten Shore. Yeah.
The Pickup Poetry by J.P. Linstroth.
That's right.
I can do that without feeling guilty because my mother happens to be British.
Yeah, you have the ancestry. I've kind of lost my English accent a little bit because it's been a while since I've been to the UK. But yeah.
And John, you say you caught about 30 minutes of that episode with John Kiriakou. What did you think of that?
I really liked it. He's a really interesting guy, first of all, and I agree with you. I think he's an American hero for letting the American people know about torture in relation to what the CIA was doing post 9/11. Of course, the erosion of civil rights from the Patriot Act. And also, I've taught on terrorism and that subject as well, and so I find it very interesting. The BAS had the terrorism thing going for a while, and I was working on the BAS peace process for a while, and so all that aspect is quite interesting for me, and so I found it very interesting, yeah, for sure.
All right, so maybe at the tail end of this we can get some of your comments, but let's get into get into some poetry here.
Sure.
And I think I was going to go after this one first off. Are you prepared to read some of this to us, or
absolutely? If you'd like me to, I'll be glad. I mean, I'll be glad to. If you have any ones that you particularly like, or I can choose one or two, or whatever you think, Ian. It's up to you.
I'm the host here. Yeah. Okay. So. Yeah. Let me see. So obviously the one I want to go into is and it's only because I spent 2 years and I don't know if you knew this or not, but I actually happened to meet Vicente Fox, who's a former president of the Mexican Republic.
Wow.
I met him while I was down in the Yucatan for a couple years. I was down there.
Wow. That's great.
And anyway, so I think as you would know, and as anybody who else has kind of lived, growing up in California, John, we didn't have the best of impressions of Mexican. I'm just in my perspective, just what it was like for me growing up. And when I was asked to live in Mexico, my eyes just kind of, whoa, wait a second. These are amazing people. And they're not all the mystique or media, your Clint Eastwood movies and whatever. These are loving, beautiful, amazing people. And
absolutely,
you learn to love their food. You learn to love their dress. You learn to love their language.
It's a wonderful country, and they have so many different indigenous populations, and you have an affinity, as I do, for the Mayan population there, and they have a wonderful history and archaeological history and prehistory and pre-colonial history, and it is just a wonderful country. That's where I first learned Spanish, Ian, in Cuernavaca.
Oh wow!
I spent a summer in Cuernavaca, and so I've had a love for Mexico since very early on as well.
I went through, and we'll get to this poem here, but I went through from en route from DFA to Acapulco. There's something called the Devil's Elbow, I think they call it, or the Devil's Turn, or something. It's like you go up out of Mexico City, and then you go down into Cuernavaca, and then you're doing like 60, and then you have to kind of slow down to like 10 to make this turn, but. Yeah. So anyway, so we'll go over to the peninsula here, and let's talk about Mayan memories. Should I read it, or
sure.
Do you have? Should I? Okay.
If you'd like, yeah, I'd be glad I'd be very honored if you read it. If you'd like, it's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So for listeners, Mayan memories. This is J.P. Linstroth. Mayan memories. They buried us with our eyes wide open. We were Ishil Mayans. We were Kinjabal al Mayans. We were Chush Mayans. We were K'ish' Mayans. We were Achi Mayans. We were Mam Mayans. We were Kechi Mayans. We were Kachiko Mayans. We were 200,000. We disappeared. They buried us with our eyes wide open. They were all lying on the ground with their hands tied behind their backs. Some were dead. Some were barely moving and alive. The soldiers were hitting them with machetes, and blood was everywhere. They gathered all the women and children into one thatched hut and burnt it to the ground. The screams were horrific and were deafening. They buried us with our eyes wide open. The guerrillas came one night to the house of my uncle asking for food. We called these people the men who came at night. They were trying to persuade people to join them. They carried away 3 men I knew. My uncle was one. When they did not come back, their families and mine went looking. We found them in the cornfields. Some had arms chopped off. Their heads were barely attached to their necks. Then the soldiers came at 4 a.m. They started shooting at all of us, terrified, screaming everywhere, running women and children. The next day, we buried so many of them in the fields. We did not perform any ceremonies. We were too afraid. They buried us with our eyes wide open. I was in the field on the hillside picking maize, beans, and peppers. They came from behind me and took me. 3 of them, soldiers. All of them laughing at me. They put a scarf in my mouth to muffle my screams. They ripped away my red huipil and corte and tore off my underwear. They were heavy on top of me, so heavy, and they had bad breath. One had a mustache and sideburns. All of them kept laughing, taking turns, holding my arms, holding my legs. I was shaking all over and could not stop trembling. They buried us with eyes wide open. My cousin disappeared one day. One day, he just did not show up. And we never heard from him again. By then, the army had burnt down our house, and we were forced to stay with my grandmother. Then one day, the army brought my uncle in a coffin to our house. His head was still bleeding. My grandmother picked up his arms, and she could still move them. They were flexible. This is when we knew. He was killed not so long ago. That is when we decided to leave the mountains, and we left for El Norte for good. They buried us with our eyes wide open. Our soul will never rest. They buried us with our eyes wide open. Well, I have to refrain from drawing tear here, and perhaps I should have let it out. But it makes me think of something that I know. The Mayan, from my understanding, they had a calendar that was more precise than that of the Aztecs. And they were in tune with science, math, astrology, and in fact, my understanding is that what we know as the number, if it can be quantified as 0, it was something that they understood and they knew. But what I'm getting
invented 0. That's correct. Yeah, sure. Yep.
But what I'm getting at, John, is my knowledge of Chichen Itza, and the only knowledge is this, and this is very interesting, right? That I don't know what was said in that 30 minutes that you caught, but one thing that John spoke of was the approach the FBI had versus what the CIA had. And the CIA would torture these
Right.
people, and they would be
Right.
unresponsive. Yet the FBI says, "Hey, let me offer you a food, a date. Let me give you something. Build a rapport."
Right.
The people that inadvertently had laid claim over the land that the Mayan were living upon. My understanding, John, it wasn't until 1913 or maybe just before that turn of the century there, but somewhere around there, where it was a Harvard Peabody scientist. I think his name was John Thompson. That took a British painter or adventurer, and they marched into Chichen Itza and they began a restoration effort. And up until that time, from the decline of whenever the Mayan had stopped using that particular city, Chichen Itza was nothing more than trees growing out of it and bushes overgrowing on top of it. So it's obviously it's how we approach. I mean, this poem makes me want to cry, John.
Thank you very much. That's very. I'm very honored by you saying that, Ian. And you're right. The first epigraphers were the turn of the 20th century. And I was just thinking that, just going, relating to what John Kirkow said, Guatemala changed after the CIA coup there in 1950, right, with Arbenz government. And because we had plantation interests there, the Arbenz government was seen as too liberal. So that government was overthrown, and we trained a lot of these military people in the School of the Americas that committed these atrocities that led to the genocide in Guatemala. So the quote, "They buried us with our eyes wide open," comes from a Harvard scholar, anthropologist, and medical doctor named Paul Farmer, who has worked and still works quite a bit in the developing world. And that was a quote from him that he, from some of his informants that he interviewed about Guatemala post-genocide, post-Civil War. And also the other stories within that poem come directly from interviews I had with people of memories of that genocide and legal depositions that lawyers in Florida took from memories of that genocide. So that rape story is from a legal deposition. The story of the uncle being brought to the house after he was newly killed or assassinated, that was from an interview that I conducted with an informant who shared her memories of her family and her as a child from that atrocity. And so this poem is actually based on real stories, Ian, real people's memories and how they felt. And to be buried with your eyes wide open in the Mayan culture is like a crime, because they have all these kind of indigenous ceremonies and ceremonies with incense, and it combines Catholicism and synchronicity. But the soul, in other words, their souls have not rested because of that. Their eyes needed to be closed. They need to be reburied. And what they meant by that was that they didn't go through the ceremony to have closure for their souls to have rest. And so that's what that phrase means that they buried us with our eyes wide open.
Wow. Wow. I mean, wow, that's just That's deep. And you're telling me that you've been writing poetry as a child, since you were a child.
Since I was a little kid, and it's probably also my interest in Native Americans, and I had an interest in animals and being a naturalist as well. And so I've been writing since I was a little kid, and this is my first attempt at a more of a complete book, and it's about 80 pages now, so it'll come out the first week of January. I'm sorry that I couldn't give you a copy earlier. We had a bit of a publishing delay, but that's what happened. So,
very thoughtful of you. So, wow, and these ancient civilizations, the Europeans, as an overall, from a governmental standpoint, I mean, right, the natives that were living on this land before Europeans arrived, they're all forced to integrate or put on reservations,
right. So the Mayan civilization had collapsed before the Spanish arrived, right?
Okay. And
the classic Maya culture, because Chichen Itza, who you just mentioned, is a post-classic site. And I'm sorry that I know a little bit about this, just because I studied archaeology, and I actually went down to Belize with Florida State, and I was part of their archaeological program. We were excavating sort of incipient maize agriculture to see if maize began in that region.
Uh-huh.
And we also were looking at, different sites, and I found a burial, like one of the last days that we were there. The Maya used to bury their dead under their houses, and we found like a 3,000-year-old burial or whatever. And it was pretty cool. So the Chichen Itza is actually a post-classic site, and it's influenced by Toltecs and from more central Mexico, because by that time the classic Maya period had collapsed, and probably mostly due, among many things, but mostly due to warfare. But there's a whole other factors why that culture civilization collapsed, right? So many factors.
Uh-huh. So but you know what is interesting is that elements survive, and certainly architecturally elements survive. But so, like, for instance, when I met this Vicente Fox, which was in a small little village of Valladolid. In that little village, which is just outside of, it's kind of your tourist stop for food and gas before getting to Chichen Itza, which is about 30-40 minutes to its west. Right in front of that convent, the Convento San Bernardino, was where I met him, and in this little village, English is very scarce. Spanish is also very scarce. Most of these people in this village, and certainly the smaller villages outside of it, that's what they speak is Mayan. And and so I learned a few phrases. I mean, Bashkawalik is one of them, and I think that may have been that basically means que pasa. But
right.
When I was reading your poem, it kind of started. The pronunciations kind of started coming back to me a bit.
Right. Those very difficult indigenous words, right? Yeah. Vicente Fox, I really like that guy. He's a really interesting intellectual, Mexican intellectual, and he's been a very outspoken critic of this current government of ours.
Yeah.
But he has a good sense of humor too. But he must have been really interesting to talk to and meet, Ian. I envy you for that. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
And of course, my favorite Mexican American writer is Carlos Fuentes.
Carlos Fuentes. I don't know him well, but I certainly recognize the name.
Yeah, he wrote a book called The Death of Artemio Cruz, which is about the Mexican Revolution, Civil War, which I really like.
Wow.
Again, another novel, a novel about memory. And I really like that book.
Yeah, Pancho Villa, Emiliano Zapata.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's get into In Kafka's Mind. Can we go there?
So I'm sorry. In Kafka's Mind, sure, we can do that.
Should I read it?
Sure. I mean, you're the host. Why not? I'm very honored for you to read my poems.
Okay. So, In Kafka's Mind by J.P. Linstroth. And again, let me just mention, J.P., for those interested in your publications, is it, what's your main web destination?
So academia.edu. And that you'll find all my publications pretty much. Academia.edu is an academic website connecting academics all over the world, really, and there's like 50 million academics connected on that website. And it's just a place where it's kind of like it's a social media forum. You put your publications there, and people look them up, and if you put them there, then more people will look at them, and so on. And actually, I put your link to the radio show that when we talked last time. I put it there, and there's quite a few people accessing that and looked at that and downloaded that.
So before we read this, and I feel honored that you want me to read it, and I certainly will. Before we read this, describe to listeners who is Kafka, and what is this poem about?
Okay, so Franz Kafka is an existential Jewish writer. Lived at the turn of the century. He unfortunately died as a young man, basically with some complications of like tuberculosis. I think he starved because he was so ill he couldn't get food down. But basically, he had all these writings and manuscripts, and he had this friend named Max Brod, and Kafka, on his deathbed, he was so ill, he had mentioned to his friend, just burn all my manuscripts, just, get rid of them. And thankfully, Max Brod didn't follow his friend's directive and ended up publishing them. And so we have a wonderful, a lot of these kind of, how do I want to say that, dystopic visions of the world and very existentialist visions of the world. You have the book, The Trial, it's this person who's on trial and he doesn't know what crimes he's charged of. And this kind of gets into your last interview with John Kiriakou, like it's just kind of the state authority able to do whatever it wants at the expense of the individual. And that's a theme that runs throughout his writings, and being Kafka being Jewish, having been persecuted in that era from racism and prejudice against Jewish people, pretty prevalent. And he also wrote the short novel, the novella, The Metamorphosis, where a man basically becomes an insect. He wrote a short story called The Hunger Artist, where the artist is on display in a cage, kind of like a Black Panther, as he describes it, and how this artists are basically starving for their art, and so on and so forth. So for many people and many writers, Kafka represents this kind of a darker aspect of humanity, and he's very much like George Orwell and his dystopic vision of the world. But at the same time, he's also kind of a precursor to people like Camus, and French writer Camus, and other writers like Jean-Paul Sartre and people like that. But it's unfortunate he died so young. But we were, as humanity, we were very fortunate that his poems, his novels and his writings and his short stories were actually published. And so I identify with Kafka in this kind of his vision of the world in a way.
So let's
Go ahead.
To describe it. Sorry,
I don't know if I did a good job or not, but
yeah.
But that's how I would
Before we get into it, two things that popped into my mind while you were describing that is, one, are you familiar with the Popol Vuh? If I pronounced that right, Popol Vuh.
Popol Vuh. The Popol Vuh. Yes. Yes, of course.
So that's something that popped into my mind, and the other thing that popped into my mind, it just escaped me, but anyway, for listeners who aren't aware of what the Popol Vuh was, when you had mentioned burning of it just came back in my mind when you had mentioned burning of transcripts and documents and work that was
Right.
that was written. This is what the Popol Vuh is and was, but it's elements of the history of the Mayan, a tribe of the Mayan, the Kiesh, I think it is. Just looking at the Wikipedia here for it, and it was when these
Well,
people.
the Popol Vuh is a sacred central text of the Mayan culture in the sense of their vision of the afterlife, right?
Okay.
And there was these twin hero gods that are sacrifice themselves, and then the gods of death in the underworld try to kill them, and then they regenerate, and so they overcome death. In other words.
Got it. Okay, I didn't know that.
So the constant theme in the Mayan culture with the Popol Vuh is regeneration of life, and death is prevalent because the Mayas practice human sacrifice and so on and so forth. So the twin heroes from the Popol Vuh are part of that mythology, as and the reasons why they had human sacrifice. So the Popol Vuh is their notions of the underworld, and that's why caves are so sacred to the Mayan people, because they are entrances to that underworld, which is represented in the Popol Vuh myth.
Interesting. Yeah. The other thing that had come to my mind as you were describing Kafka was, so since we've spoken last, I've brought in, and this is maybe what you caught if you were listening to the beginning of this segment. Julie Gomez she's joined a staff that I'm creating now, and she's a local journalism student. But she'll be contributing on a weekly basis various items of research. And today she spoke about net neutrality, but last week she spoke about Guantanamo Bay. And this is why there's relevance here, because these prisoners at Guantanamo are drawing these what seem to be the images that I've seen. I don't know how they've gotten out, but beautiful kind of sunset, sunrise. They're
right.
They're
their art. Yeah, I've seen that. Yes. I saw that.
And unfortunately, the U.S. military on the stance of that is to destroy this. From what I know, and so she kind of looked in that a little bit, but anyway, so that's a segue. But we can kind of. We can put together ends that make a spark. The human mind is a.
So it's interesting that Guatemala. There's a whole. I think there's a curator. I can't remember where, Ian, but there's a curator and there's an exhibit of their drawings and their paintings. I think if I'm not mistaken, it's the Metropolitan Museum of Art or it's the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, one of the two, and they're displaying their artwork.
Oh, they are? Okay. They're displaying it. Okay.
From what I've read, from what I saw on television or whatever, so I just saw it briefly.
Okay, so in Kafka's mind, it reads as this again by J.P. Linstroth. In the darkest recesses, the indignant regresses, and the constant obsessive, self-loathing feelings, thoughts, growing reelings, inquisitions in disquietude, attritions in plentitude, bureaucrats in shadow plays, all autocrats, shallow displays, an insurance technocrat, and yet a writer true. How even then he knew. Brooding for the glowing moon, alluding to the gloaming and unending doom, denials and obfuscation, trials without causation. God or no, flawed fellow, Judaism, cloaked from others' racism, times of incipient fascism, oceanless atheism, and socialist activism, sometimes his animal magnetism and stoic skepticism, self-aggrandizing substitutes, women for fathers, ebony, calligraphy, womanizing, prostitutes, pornography, galvanizing, fortitude, permutes with those haunting others, varying, enigmatic iconography. So many near betrothals, or mere women in brothels, the Oedipal disapproving patriarch, the contemptible adducing birthmark, burn the notebooks with bonfire, burn them all, spurn with an austere outlook, mired in earnest thrall, the prodigious godsend, max, broad, accusations and prosecutions of nonsensical crimes, unethical persecutions of nightmarish times, epical tragedies without absolutions, perishing in his prime. Who are the accusers and abusers, conjurers and users of dark arts? Witness black pagan hearts, daggered with poisoned arrows, tuberculosis, sickness, flagrant fictive counterparts, laggard treasons without reason, dead sparrows, torturous confusions with life's many delusions, profusions of doubts and pinoid whereabouts, the insane and the profane, concealed mysteries of the inane, lunatic conspiracies with wax and wane, heretic histories of great pain, obsessions with unknown entities, confessions of non-transgressions to nefarious enmities, deleterious felonies without apparent remedies, shadowed loneliness, hollowed obliqueness, nonetheless hollowed out to confess, transformations into slimy vermin, into bug, into insect, damnations through pensively burning, through hallucinations without drugs, mental malformations, hitherto the eternal suspect, circumspect, frustrations, hideous sensations, and piteous machinations, svelte, muscled black leopard, in hunger knelt, muffled, shuffled, attacked poetic shepherd, recompense for the offense of starvation, in defense of deprivation, personal privations, ravenous pacing in the cage, callous debasing on the stage, muted oligarchy of the foreboding fortress, disputed citizenry of encoding thoughtless, reputed hierarchy of goading conscious, to the void, to the abyss, to nothingness, to avoid, to miss, to the senseless, devoid, remiss, timeless, paranoid, reminisce, oblivion, darkness, destroyed, resist, unforgiven civilian, hopeless, absurd isolation, abject frustration, incurred desolation, disconnected narration, oppression and regression, living in eternal fear, non-intercessions from transgressions, unforgiving, infernal, and austere, convert, depression, horrendous, and ever tragic, overt suppression, portentous and endeavored manic and pathologic, an elegy to the forlorn and forsaken outcast, the apogee of him born to accusations unsurpassed.
Yes, thank you.
In Kafka's mind, that's a lot going on.
Yes, and you have to understand, like in that poem, Ian, I tried to encompass all his writings, all his thoughts, all his, all what he represented in his writings, and also his personal biography as well.
Wow. There's some words in there, obviously, that I didn't know how to pronounce, nor did I know the meaning of. But
right, and one of my editors said, one of the things he said is that, John, you know, your poetry can be intellectually challenging, and it challenges the reader, right? It's challenging to the reader, right?
So,
but it's meant to be that way in a way, and I guess I was very much influenced by the Irish poet laureate Seamus Heaney in that regard.
And how so?
Seamus Heaney writes in very symbolic and obscure ways, and he has a way of turning a phrase or having meaning that, in the first representation, is not, you know, it's not what it's being represented. You know, a bog can be the conflict in Northern Ireland, for example, and so there's a lot of hidden meaning in it. And as I mentioned in my preface of this book, is that what I try to represent is an archaeology of emotions, and you know, I'm getting that notion, that idea from Michel Foucault, as a French philosopher, his notion of the idea of archaeology of knowledge, where in my view of how to interpret that is that the reader has to dig to understand kind of the emotions that are being brought forward in the writing.
So Forgotten Shore includes, it looks like you've got 80 poems in there. Is that right?
I think how many do I have? I think it's 36 poems. That's 80 pages.
80 pages. Okay.
Yeah.
And what?
38 poems, maybe. Yeah, 38. Sorry.
What poem sticks out in your mind as being one that kind of portrays the forgotten shore, whatever that alludes to?
Thank you. I guess it depends on who the reader is in the audience and what they want to get out of it. I mean, you know, part of it was writing about my divorce and going through those emotions. And so the Forgotten Shore itself, I mean, there's a poem, the last poem of the book is The Forgotten Shore, which the book is named after. And the idea of the Forgotten Shore is that it's a place that, you know, somehow that the love you had for this other person broke off and you're kind of left on this forgotten shore. It could be like an island, or it could be a beach somewhere. It could be somewhere where you feel forgotten. But what I wrote in the preface, too, is that what's not evident to the reader necessarily is that, you know, that there's hope. You know, there's hope to find love again. There's hope to find love once more, that you don't necessarily need to stay on that forgotten shore. So that's one of the things. And then there's more humorous poems actually in the book too. I mean, I have one which is an ode to dogs. I have one about a little ant, philosophize about, and then there's a lot of Greek mythology in there. There's a lot about art because as an artist, and then there's some natural observations as well. I mean, I have one about the Loxahatchee River, and then I have others about other rivers. So there's a little bit of everything in there. Certainly, it's about love and loss and memories of loss, and it's also about biographies of people too, people that I've known, like my grandparents and things like that. So there's a little bit of everything, I think, in it.
John, how long is this compilation take for you to put together?
Some of the poems are years old. Some were written recently. A few, like about 4 of the poems this past year. I put together in kind of a frenzy of artistic inspiration. A majority of poems within the 8th month, even a 6 to 8 month period. I had a lot of the poems that are the majority of the book. But like "Ode to a Child," for example, that's an ode. That's a poem to my brother, whose wife had a miscarriage at the 3rd term of their pregnancy. It was kind of sad. And then "The Veil" is about my experiences in Sevilla, Spain, and kind of take on that. The Aranzaliak is about Basque fishermen, which I kind of studied in the Basque Country in Spain. And then there's, other things, poems that were written, I guess, in memory of my ex-wife, and there's even a couple poems about Cassie in there, who I wished happy birthday tonight. And then, so there's a little bit of everything, so that's, yeah.
And what type of reception is the book getting? And maybe it's probably too new to market. It
hasn't even come out yet, so it hasn't. It's supposed to have been published in December, but we had a hiccup because the poem that you just read, and again, I'm very honored that you'd read it, in Kafka's Mind. For whatever reason, in the back and forth between edits and looking at drafts, my editor just forgot to include it, and so I asked him, can he include it, and he did. So that's been a delay. So hopefully I'll have the books coming out the first week of January, and they'll be going out to all those who had supported my Indiegogo campaign to actually pre-buy the books to help with the production. So, there was, but fortunately too is that the editor, the publisher of the book, Poetic Matrix Press, had its 20th anniversary this past year, 2017, and so they put me in the anthology. I was very fortunate about that, and I really like the editor. His name is John Peterson. He's in California, in Northern California, and and so I just feel very fortunate, Ian, that it actually got published, because I wasn't even sure if somebody would pick them up. Art is very subjective, and as you know, and so somebody may not like some writings of somebody, and somebody else might not like it, and
sure.
You'll always hear about these novelists, of the past that might not be published today because of how they wrote or whatever. So,
Poetic Matrix Press.
Yes. But how do you think? I mean, what are your thoughts in just having read a couple of them poems? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, this is art, and I didn't air my show last week because Art Basel came into town, and so this little station that I broadcast from here on 27th and I think it's 3rd. They kind of got overrun with art programming, so
okay.
My slot got got used up by the art. So I didn't go last week, but this this is to me, this is art. This is just a form of art,
Thank
right?
you.
I mean,
Thank you. Yes. Thank you.
it's really it's a and this is another thing that I'm equating it to. So next I'm going to start the new year off with a guest named Dan Winter. He's a fractal field theorist and scientist.
Oh, wow.
Former systems analyst at IBM, but he's currently consulting for virtual reality computers. I mean, the way that this guy thinks is, and he uses a lot of golden ratio. If you're familiar with what that is, in kind of his theorizing of, I guess, how man is able to.
Yeah, Da Vinci used the golden ratio quite often. That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds familiar. So he's going to kick off 2018 for my show, and
Great.
it's basically he also talks a lot about a few people. One would be John Dee, the other one would be Sir Francis Bacon, and the other one would be Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. And certainly the initial two actually influenced the writings of Shakespeare, and we know certainly that Shakespeare is influenced by some incredible ancient linguistics of the past. So that's the first thing that kind of comes to my mind, John, is how crafty you've been able to formulate your words, and that first one just really spoke to me, and I think maybe that's because I know a little bit about part of that culture, but the words that you used with the woman who had been abused. It's a previous guest I've had on the program is she incepted the Me Too. Tarana Burke.
Me Too, right?
Me Too hashtag, and so I just it's anyway the ways that you're able to speak without speaking
right,
is phenomenal.
No, thank you. I'm very humbled by you saying that. Yeah, it's a form of communication. I'm trying to communicate feelings to the world and doing it in a very symbolic way. And, it's a whole different type of writing, John, than an academic book or a popular book or whatever, or what have you. I mean, it's, and it is the use of a lot of symbolism and a lot of iconography and things that come to mind and to represent. And I personally, I like Greek mythology. I go back to it, and I guess because, one of the things that when I was a little kid, I was at grade school, I was taught the Greek mythology by this great English teacher that I had, and I just really fell in love with it. And since then, I've kind of infused my poems with it. But in a lot of ways, if you look at the history of, I guess, English literature or Western thought of, I think you had mentioned even earlier on that Greek thought has influenced how we all think, right? And the mythology are classic ways of paradigms of teaching lessons about the world too. So I think that's quite important.
Wow. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned Greek mythology. I spent a few years in school in Oregon, and there's a very large, well-known apparel company for athletics that emerged from the institution, and so I too actually I remember taking these art history classes from a guy that I think it was. I don't know if he had gone to Brown, or I'm not sure where he had studied. Mm-hmm. He'd studied a sculpture, an ancient sculpture called the Critias Boy, and and it was Jeffrey's kind of understanding of the way that the sculpture was designed, that he's looking at it, and I don't know if it was in the British Museum or where it was, and he's looking at it, and he says, wait a second, that head, and this kind of sent shockwaves around the kind of world of the Critias boy and those who were studying it and interesting. This head is not properly displayed, and it needs to be adjusted, this way. And so that was nobody had caught on to that previous, and I don't really know what led to him understanding that and realizing that needed to be made. But I used to love those classes that he would talk about. Athena and the Acropolis, and so you and I we'd share. I think I can understand your fascination with that culture as well.
No, thank you. Yeah, for sure. And it's sometimes when you ask an artist, like, how did you come up with that idea, or what inspired you for this or that or whatever.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard. You're hard put to like put it all together.
Sure.
But I can say some of the basic events in my life that led to writing that or whatever. And as I mentioned before, it's the love lost, or a parent or a grandparent having died, or finding love again, or just observing nature and all its power and beauty. To me, are different inspirations, right? There's different levels of inspiration, or even an artist like Kafka, a writer like Kafka, who really never saw the fruition of his works being published. He really didn't want them to be published. Ended up being one of the greatest writers in the world literature.
Yeah.
But it's just, that's the thing. I mean, about art, and you can say the same thing for kind of an artist like Van Gogh, like Vincent Van Gogh.
Or Picasso.
I
once asked Oliver Stone, this was in San Francisco at a movie theater, where he was giving a discussion of one of his, I don't remember the name of that film, but Sicario? No, that was somebody different. Anyway, one of his films, and he'd done these previous. He'd done Platoon, he'd done Wall Street, and whatever. And I says, he's taking a Q&A, and I stand up and I said, Oliver, what drives you? What drives you? And as you're talking, about kind of what went into you creating this piece, if you will. If you can kind of singularize it, I'm thinking, hey, what drove Hemingway, right, to do what he was doing, and the basic response that I got from Oliver, and I'd have to go back and replay that, but because a friend of mine actually recorded it, but the basic response that I remember getting from Oliver was basically the same message of, I want to deliver truth to the world. I want to deliver something of honesty, and there's like this underlying kind of foundation for all of us that kind of, hey, look here, here's this woman in Guatemala that she's like, hey, I was raped, I need help. This is wrong, and there's like this.
Who's her voice, right? Who's that woman's voice, right? How do you capture a victim like that? There's a whole debate on art and trauma and art and horror. Like, like after the Holocaust, for example, Ian. Like, are you really supposed to write about such an unspeakable horror, such as the Holocaust, right after it happened? And that was a huge debate. And then, of course, you had people like Primo Levi, who wrote about it, and then you had Wiesel, who wrote, The Night, and of course, people did end up writing about it and did, I guess, create art from tragedy, from trauma. But like, for example, how can you encompass that woman's horror, her trauma? I mean, it's the unspeakable aspects of humanity. I mean, these are, and art's supposed to be the most elevated, right? So it's that contrast.
Yeah. JP, share with us as we'll wrap things up here. Share with us your next project. Where you're taking your career next.
Thanks for asking. So I have a book in the works that it's called "Civilizing Abuses." Indigeneities and in an Amazonian city, and basically it's about my research in Brazil on urban Amerindian groups. But I'm also I'll be starting more of a creative project. I've already really started writing a novel. I wrote a novel, Ian, I finished a novel when I was 23, a 500-page book that I had an agent in New York and everything, and I didn't want to change the ending, so it ended up being shelved at the Brodigan Library, which is a library for non-published writers. But I'm still interested in that genre, and so future writing-wise, I have a nonfiction book and I have a fiction book I'm working on.
Incredible, John. Wow.
Well, thank you.
You impress me more and more all the time.
I'm very humbled, and I assure you, I'm I don't want to come off as some intellectual snob or anything like that. So.
Yeah, well, you don't. You don't. Wow. Okay, so awesome. That'll wrap things up for us. And
can I just make a comment on Hemingway, though?
Yes, of course.
Because I've read everything that the guy's written.
Okay.
And then I encountered somebody who had also done that, and to me, as a young man, Hemingway was the fundamental writer. I mean, he's been my inspiration to write, and maybe it's the clarity of his prose, but also the kind of the life he led. And the sad thing, of course, is that he committed suicide at the end, but he was an interesting guy. And the reason why I comment on Hemingway in particular is that he's a very quintessential American writer, not only being part of what Gertrude Stein called the Lost Generation, defining the writers after World War I, but he defined a whole new kind of way of writing prose, and I think a lot of his works are classics that should be are in the canon of American literature, but should also be read again and again. So.
Anything in particular that stands out with you from him and how he impressed you?
With Hemingway?
Yeah.
Well, let's see. His short story writing. I mean, there's a short story called "Hills Like White Elephants," which is about a little short story about whether or not the woman he's with should have an abortion or not. It's quite a telling piece, and it's all obscure, and you don't really know it. You don't really you have to figure it out kind of by the end. But of course, the novel that probably garnered him the Nobel Prize was Old Man the Sea. The journey of this old man with this giant marlin that he catches and keeps it tied up to the boat, and all the sharks attack the fish, and he's really not left with much by the time he returns to shore, but having had caught the great fish, and so on. Mm-hmm. And so again, what attracts me, or what draws me to Hemingway himself. I mean, there's so much. Maybe those Paris years, Movable Feast is a great collection of stories. Of course, he and F. Scott Fitzgerald knew each other and didn't really like each other, or used to make fun of F. Scott. But I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just kind of maybe being a sportsman and all those kind of things that were kind of interesting when I was growing up as a teenager. Not that I condone, big game hunting or anything like that nowadays, but I just the way that he writes and is able to carry a mood in very short sentences, I think, is one of his gifts, and proves that American literature belongs in all the great literatures of the world. And he was one of the writers that did that.
Well said. Very well said. JP, thank you for coming on the show. Safe travels.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy birthday again, right? Happy birthday to your girlfriend.
To Tassia. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I thank you so much for the invitation. I know that, the genre approach is not something that you usually probably cover in your programs, but I appreciate you inviting me again on your show and for an interesting discussion and for agreeing to have read a couple of my poems. I'm very honored that you did so, and and of course I'd like to keep you in mind as writing projects come up and as I have more publications, and that we could talk again, hopefully.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. Absolutely.
Me too, and I will definitely be sending you a copy of the book as soon as I have it in my hands.
Very kind of you. Very, very kind. Very kind.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, if you could one last time throw out that website that people can go to, that would be awesome.
Yes, it's academia.edu, and it you can go there for free. You can also sign up for free, and if it's a good resource even for students or for really anybody who's interested in kind of academic writing. If you want to download an article, you just type in a subject you might be interested in, or just type like anthropology, and a lot of articles will pop up, or Amazonian Indians, and a lot of articles will pop up. So it's just a good resource for information as well. For academics is a way of connecting with other academics, but it's also just a good resource for, books to read or articles to read and so on.
Very cool. Very cool. Ladies and gentlemen.
And the publisher of this is Poetic Matrix Press, Forgotten Shore.
And where are they based in?
So they're in California.
Yeah. Berkeley or San Francisco?
It will be available on Amazon.com, by the way.
Okay. Poetic Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, JP Linstroth. JP, until next time.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, bye.
Take care. Bye.
JP Linstroth has a doctorate of philosophy and is an incredibly gifted writer. He rejoins discussions, rejoins this program for a second time. And the first time he was on, it just happened that Pascal and he were talking about the same thing, and in a sense. And so I was able to pair the discussion together. And I got another sneeze moment. Okay. Pardon me. And it was a discussion regarding Spain and the Basque region. So this was the first time I got to spend time one-on-one with JP, and what a wonderful show we were able to deliver to you this afternoon. I will be back in 2 weeks, the 3rd of January. I'll be back to you in the new year. I'll be back with fractal field theorist and scientist Dan Winter. And as I mentioned earlier, I've got a lineup of a few different folks that will be joining in January, but two of them will concentrate on vaccine education. Barbara Lowe Fisher, co-founder and president of the National Vaccine Information Center. Her books, articles, and research have appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, USA Today, Time Magazine, and Newsweek. She's also appeared on CNN, CBS, Fox, MSNBC, Al Jazeera, NPR, and NBC's Today Show. And like past guest Rachel Ross, she's actually also been on The Doctors. CBS is The Doctors. Rachel was a mainstay. Barbara has appeared on it. But Barbara will be bringing her knowledge and research of vaccines and her movement to educate in regard to the program next month. And we'll also be joined by Dr. Sherry J. Tenpenny, osteopathic medical doctor. So we've got some great things happening here, and it'll be an exciting, exciting, exciting new year. If you're still listening, happy birthday again to JP's girlfriend down in Brazil. Be safe and enjoy JP. And I leave you today with the same words that I always leave with. I'm going to add Happy Holidays and Happy New Year. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I am your host, Ian Hamilton Trottier. You've tuned in to discussions on WinwoodRadio.com. Follow me on Twitter, IANTROTTIER. Follow me on Instagram, Facebook if you choose. And the words are, be awesome.